I think from the student perspective, right, the hull and all those pieces about how to create places for the electrical propulsion system to live, those ME problems are really hard to change down the road. And there's some decisions sometime between like February where it's like we gotta live with this situation, that we are out of the realm of fixing ME problems. And then we got the EE problems of like, well, we want it to be waterproof, or this aspect of it, and we can let water be in here, but then we start finding a little bit of heat issue, and we just need... but then it gets to what you're saying is it's a systems engineering problem. And that the thing that ties together all three of those disciplines is the testing. We have to test the hull, see how the hull sits in the water, see how it moves, and then you got to test the propulsion system, test it, and have a good lab where you test it, and then you integrate them together, and then it's going to show you all new issues. But if you don't have
goes back to what we're saying in the very beginning, which was if you have a hull that you're considering and you can throw an existing gas-powered outboard on there for the simplicity of this is a known amount of power with a known amount of weight, how does the boat perform under those circumstances? You know, you can use that data to help, you know, plan a lot going forward. But if you have to wait to see how that hull would even fare in this racing circumstances until you have all of the other components done and mounted, and then realize this isn't the ideal hull. You know, in the case of us building it, we didn't have a way to, you know, test it out with something else before it was done, because the time it took to build the hull was more you know, more time consuming than the time it took to build the other components. You know, I would say at least twice the time that it took. And that was, last year was a very time intensive year for the team. And I would say something we don't necessarily want to do every year.
I think for the manned competition, it really does feel like a 2-year build. That like you kind of have to take the first year to kind of get everything to like 60% of what you had in your head. But that last 40% is going to take you just as much time because...
And then so the question is like, how can you, knowing that you potentially have a 2-year process, still compete in the year between? And so if you're going to be doing something with a hull like that, do you have something else that's turnkey and maybe isn't ideal, but you could take that system and drop it on and be able to run and still come and compete at PEP? Because the information that you find about how the propulsion side maybe works is still invaluable. You might still find that you've got situation where you overheat, or you've got a situation where it cavitates, and then you could say, well, this transom is slightly too high, and well, let's look at the other hull that we're building. Okay, this one's lower. It's gonna, you know, we're helping to address the depth that the prop is sitting in the water, whatever it may be. Because it's also sometimes hard to know the way the boat's gonna, especially if it's a relatively short boat, where you know the length of it. If it's a very long boat and you've got a little extra weight from one motor versus the other, you might find that if it's a very long boat, the transom is going to sit at a significantly different height. But when it's a shorter boat and it's got more sort of rock, forward and aft rock to it, if you load up the transom of the boat with a big electric motor or something that's heavier than what it was, you know, originally was mounted on there, then maybe the height's not going to be the same. Or if it's lighter, it might sit up out of the water, you know, and so you have to worry about maybe water coming in over the transom, or maybe you're cavitating or whatever it might be.
And then I think like the parallel for the unmanned teams is that they can change that hull a little bit more, and it's a little bit easier to like prototype and iterate. We talk about the one design where they're using popsicle sticks to build a boat. I don't think most teams are going to go that way, but at the same time, when you have a wooden structure, you can add and take away from that pretty easily, or just throw the whole thing out and start fresh.
And one of the things that we've decided, I'm giving all my inside secrets here. One of the routes that we've decided to pursue going forward is more of a modular approach when possible. And so by comparison, the trimaran has a lot of aspects that are very fitted and custom. And the idea was, for example, these 3 modular battery compartments, we wanted to get them in the ideal spot located in the boat, as low as we can for the center of mass, and you know, structurally and everything, so that way they're separated and all this. But if we wanted that to be more modular in approach, we would have had 3 identical removable battery cases that were in themselves waterproof, with some kind of a little shelf spot where you could slot them in, strap them down, or somehow attach them, and then connect them from one to the next. And then the beauty of that is, if something is wrong with one of the batteries, something's not performing well, you could extract that piece, work on it outside the boat, or perhaps, like we're currently looking at the idea of now, is well, what if we wanted to experiment with a different hull?
Right.
Currently, we have to come up with another set of batteries, another propulsion system. The one that's in our wooden boat is less power than we would want to use for faster performing boats going forward. So now we're looking at building a complete new propulsion system. But this is the opportunity for us to take what we've learned and now change the packaging of it. And then if you're thinking about this from not just an EE and an ME standpoint, but from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if you start to thinking about the commercial paths forward in something like this, that's one of the things that I'd love to see our students considering is this is a solution that you're developing, but if that's going to become a commercially viable solution, how does it adapt from this sort of DIY, sort of temporary, kind of version to something that is easily buildable, replicable, modular for swapping out components for repairing and all these different aspects of it.
Right.
Because that's part of the design process as well if you want it to be a solution that is more adaptable to public use. When we're talking about race teams that are building these specifically for racing for more or less single purpose use, they can afford to be maybe more custom and you see that quite often also for reasons of what particular tooling you have and things like that. You build them around your capabilities and whatnot. But that's one of the things we're trying to do now is to incorporate that entrepreneurial side as well and do all those things that we've been doing and then also think about, how can we make this a battery module that you could use in this boat or in that boat?
Right.
Or you could say, we've got a boat that, we've got a fleet of boats. Let's say our sailing team has a fleet of boats and they use a module or two with each of their boats every day when they go out and they do sailing team or crew team, whatever it might be. But then you might say, okay, well now we're going to be taking this biology group out and they're going to be going much further. We're dragging a trawling net, doing all these water quality samples, whatever. They want to use this other research boat that's got an electric motor. Let's just put 5 sets of these, all in parallel and give that capacity that would be needed. Mm-hmm. And then when they come back, we'll take them out, stick them back where they had come from. And it gives you this flexibility in the fleet aspect to adapt to most of the time we're going to use them this way, but we want to be able to adapt and do things that are a little bit, and not limit ourselves, down the future. And so one way to do that would be maybe like a hybrid system. But if you're talking fully battery powered, then having the ability to use these modular, swap them together, do different things like that is a desirable approach.
I think the modular design has really worked well for clubs too, where they have many teams working on subsystems, where that allows you to set some parameters of the inputs and the outputs, so that way a team of 8 to 10 can work independently on something, knowing that they're going to receive X, Y, and Z.
That's a really good point. That's one of the things I saw at the Naval Academy. They were working with their Formula SAE team. They were the ones who, I guess those students were the ones who had developed the battery pack, and I guess maybe supplied the controller and things as well. But so one of the things that was useful about that is that they had sort of separate groups, all part of the Naval Academy's student team, but separate groups that were collaborating with the areas where they had expertise. And so they had already been building these battery packs and had great success with using them in this other application. But they made one of these packs available. Another thing I should maybe mention that I learned from what they were doing, which in hindsight is such an easier approach to doing one of the things that they're doing. Todd Green was showing me the outboard that they were converting. It was a much nicer, more modern, Honda outboard that didn't look like it was destined for the scrapyard if it hadn't been converted. And so in the process of removing the power head, it wasn't desirable to take it and rip it apart and cut the end of the drivetrain out of the crankshaft. But he got, I didn't realize this was a thing. It's a tool that's used by mechanics when they're working on, and they can basically adapt to the end of the crankshaft. I guess so they can put it on a tool and they can spin it or do whatever they want to do. But it's a machined piece that you can buy that I guess Honda or maybe third parties make that is already designed to fit on the end of the lower unit, the drive shaft. And so if there's already a piece that exists that is not that much money, then not only is it great to get it because you know that the fit's going to be good, but perhaps that also gives you the ability to say, this one outboard motor can serve multiple purposes. the Naval Academy competes at PEP, and they also compete at the Y Island race, which one's a 5-mile sprint, the other one's a 24-mile marathon.
Right.
Maybe they want to use different motors. And if that's the case, if you could have something that has that same bolt pattern and can pop it off, and the coupler and everything's just permanently mounted to the motor, it makes it, a matter of 4 bolts, and then whatever your electrical connections are, if that's perhaps all you might need to change out one ideal motor for the other ideal motor,
right.
and then have a drivetrain that's been tuned for the situations that need. Maybe that's the way to do it in some cases.
Yeah, and I think teams find the same parallels in the electrical system too, where if you have distinct endpoints that have structural, this is this component, this is this component, this component, and then this component, oops, we fried it. Well, we just need to fill in the middle, right?
Yeah. If everything's soldered together, it's a little harder to quickly swap stuff out.
And I know in the beginning you're going to end up with a bird's nest of wires. It just inevitably, it's hard to get those things to function. But as soon as you can start to simplify and connectors and bind wires together so that they're traveling together, all that makes it a lot easier to manipulate.
Yeah. And speaking from experience, when you can have your wiring very well managed, it does make troubleshooting much easier when things do go wrong.
Well, and I think the other thing it allows is a lot of teams have gotten into a point where there's only one person that could actually operate the craft because all of the design ended up in here for a certain aspect.
Yeah.
And that's not a team anymore, right? You want to be able to have a wiring diagram or have a conversation or have a video
and not
or
have
something.
it be a mystery
Right.
to the new members of the team who weren't there when it was assembled.
Right.
At this point, it's a mess of wires, and it just is like a black box that power goes in, and on the other end the propeller spins. You definitely want it to be approachable to the team members who've come later in the game. That's a good point as well.
Well, and I think it just. As this is a workforce development program at its heart, being able to write the documentation, express that stuff to other people, that is the kind of stuff you'll be talking about in your job interviews. So spending the extra 6 hours it'd probably take to do that work, I know it's a hassle.
Plus it's stuff that we kind of have to do for the white paper and everything that we develop for
it's
the
all
competition
in there for
anyway.
a reason.
So, it's if you're going to have to do it for the competition, you might as well organize yourself in the process of designing and assembling everything as well. Yeah.
Well, I think we got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah,
this was great.
I'm glad to be able to come and contribute.